Hey friends, it's Corey from Hey Let's Make Stuff, and in today's video we are talking all about how to use a heat press. So I recently had my 5-in-1 Amazon heat press die. It just bit the dust. It wouldn't turn on, so I upgraded to this new WALApress from Heat Transfer Warehouse. And in this video I'm going to show you how to use it. You may have a different heat press, not this heat press, and that's totally fine. Most heat presses function fairly similarly, so although everything isn't going to be exactly the same, this video should help you start off on the right foot. I'm making this video because a lot of the instructions that come with heat presses are very basic. You may get like a small overview of the press and you may learn how to change the time and temperature settings, but that's about it. So hopefully in this video, I will give you a more further overview of how to use a heat press. So if you're watching this video and you have no idea what a heat press is, it's basically a machine that allows you to take a transfer and put it on some sort of a blank substrate. So whether or not you're using heat transfer vinyl that you've cut with a Cricut or a Silhouette, or you're using a Sublimation print or a DTF print or a DTV print or an eco-solvent print. There are a lot of things that you can use to take those prints and then put them on some sort of substrate. So here I have a onesie. I made this with heat transfer vinyl and a heat press. This is just one of the examples of what you can make. Heat transfer vinyl is probably one of the most popular products to use when you are using a heat press. The other thing I do a lot of is sublimation. This is a sublimation print that I've put on a metal photo panel. It's pretty cool. If you want to learn more about sublimation, I will go ahead and link to some of my sublimation tutorials down in the description. It's a whole other world and I really love it, but it is a good use of a heat press. Additionally, there are lots of kinds of heat presses. So in this video, I am talking about flat heat presses. This is for pressing flat items like that onesie or that photo panel. You can make signs and tote bags, pillowcases, those sorts of things, anything that lays flat. There are also specialty heat presses for making things like mugs or tumblers or hats or other interestingly shaped objects. I actually recently did a video covering 9 different types of heat presses I have here in my office. I didn't actually have this press at that time. I was using my Amazon press, but if you'd like to see that video, I will link it as well. When you get your heat press, it's going to come fully assembled or nearly fully assembled in the box. There's not going to be a lot that you need to do to it. You may have to like screw on the pressure knob or something like that, but generally it will all be in one piece. Heat presses are very heavy. This thing weighs 60 pounds. My Amazon heat press weighed 40 pounds. I was barely able to get this out of the box and onto my desk, and I actually had my husband move it from where I normally use it over to here for this video because it really is very heavy. So you want to make sure that you have a sturdy desk to put it on. You don't want to put it on some sort of flimsy table or cart. You don't want a 400-degree, 60-pound heat press to come crashing to your feet. It's just not a good idea. So find a really sturdy table to put it on. As a crafter, there are probably one of 2 types of presses that you're going to have. There's a clamshell press, which this one is a clamshell press, and a swing away press. So as you can see, when I open this one here, it opens like a clamshell, sort of with this sort of hinge system in the back. A swing away press instead, the platen comes up and then you swing it away. So the platen always stays flat. It doesn't open like a hinge here. It always stays flat and moves out of the way of your project. The hard part about the swing away press is that you need quite a bit of space on either side of your press to swing that top platen away from what you're working on. On a clamshell press, you don't need that because the top platen goes up. This does make me very nervous though to try and fit a project in here. So I made sure when I bought this press, I really wanted one with a drawer. I wanted to be able to pull the project out far away from that really hot platen because I am a klutz. And I just really didn't want to burn myself. And that is something that I liked about the swing away press. You get that top platen swung all the way behind the machine while you're working on your project. So when I knew I wanted something that had a little bit smaller footprint to the sides because the other one took up quite a bit of room when I was using it, I knew I wanted to get one with a drawer like this. They do make them both ways, with the drawer and without. If you have one without a drawer, I just want to make sure you're being very careful when you're putting your project on your press so that you don't get burned. The other big difference between a clamshell and a swing away press is the type of projects that you can do. 99% of the projects are going to be the same, but if you want to make thick projects, like if you want to put heat transfer vinyl on like a wood sign, you're probably going to want a swing away press. That's because the platen comes down straight on top of your project. Here, because it hinges closed, you'll see that it can kind of squeeze the project out, like you might squeeze the end of a toothpaste tube, right? It sort of can scoot the project out. This is just not quite as good for thick projects. I don't do a lot of projects like that, so it's not really a big concern to me, but if you are somebody who does those thick projects, you'll probably want to go with a swing away press. There is a hybrid between the clamshell and the swing away press, and that is the Cricut AutoPress. The Cricut AutoPress's hinge opens like a clamshell, but when you get about 4 inches above it, it then comes straight down as though it was a swing away flat press, so you can use much thicker projects in it. The problem is that machine is very expensive. I do have one and I actually do really like it, but I know it's not for everybody. If you want to learn more about that, I will go ahead and link to it in the description below as well. Whether you have a clamshell press or a swing away press, the parts on them are basically the same. To start, you have that top heat platen. That is where all the heat lives, and it's very, very hot. This goes up to at least 400 degrees. Don't want to touch it. And that also means that this outer casing here that holds that top heat platen can get very hot. There is a warning here on top of that heat platen to remind you that not only the inside is hot, but the outside as well. Then there's also the bottom platen, which is usually made of aluminum. This doesn't get hot on its own, but it will be hot after you press something because you're putting, 300 to 400 degrees worth of heat into it. So also be aware that this gets very hot. Pretty much all heat presses are also going to come with a pressing pad, usually made of rubber or foam. This just protects your project from being sandwiched between 2 pieces of metal. It just does a little bit of give. Like I said, my bottom platen actually pulls out. I really like this feature, but I do want to mention one thing. I am not used to having a pull-out bottom platen because I had that swing away press, and twice now I've tried to close this press with the whole thing still pulled out, which meant that I am basically tipping this entire heat press at myself, and it was not good. It was off balance and a little bit scary. It's totally user error because I just didn't push it back in, but if you're not used to having a drawer, I just want you to be aware that it will sort of tip forward if you try and close the press while that drawer is open. The heat press is also going to have a handle that you use to open and close it. If it's a swing away press, it will still be a clamp, but then you will swing it instead of just opening it. They're just a little bit different. You're also going to have a pressure knob. So this one sits right in the center of the press, and this changes how much pressure you are putting on your projects. Some projects need light pressure, some need medium, and some need heavy pressure, and you use that knob to adjust the pressure. Up here in the back is the control panel. This is where you're going to set your time and temperature. Depending on your heat press, you may have other options in there. This one has, in addition to time and temperature, I can change it from Celsius to Fahrenheit, which is great because I work in Fahrenheit. Great if you work in Celsius. And then there's also a feature of this particular heat press if for some reason it's not producing the same amount of heat that it says it is. So if you get something like a temperature gun and you're like, wait, this says it's 400, but it's only at 380, there is a way to calibrate the machine so that you actually get a more accurate reading out of the box up here. I hope I don't have to use that feature, but I like to know that it's there just in case as this press ages, if it just isn't quite as accurate, I will be able to change the readout so that I know that I'm getting the correct temperature that my projects require. On the control panel, there is the on-off switch. This heat press and most heat presses have an auto-off feature, which means that if you accidentally leave it on after a while of non-use, it will turn off. This is a great safety feature because nobody wants to leave a 400-degree press on for any longer than they need to. And finally, all of this sits on a heavy metal base. Like I said, this one here is 60 pounds. It weighs a lot. You want to make sure it's on a sturdy table. It does have sort of little suction cup feet, which keeps it from sliding around, which is awesome. Next, let's talk about time, temperature, and pressure settings. I get a lot of questions, how long do I press this for? What temperature should I use? And honestly, the easiest thing to do is Google because everything is different. Each material or blank is going to have recommended time, temperature, and pressure settings. Sometimes it will be actually on the package. So if you're using something like a heat transfer vinyl or a printable iron-on or a DTV, something like that, you want to use the time, temperature, and pressure settings for the material itself. If you're doing a sublimation project, however, you want to know your time, temperature, and pressure settings based on the blank. That's because the material doesn't change. You're always using a sublimation print, but the blank changes a lot. So, for example, this is a sublimation ornament and it should be pressed at 350 degrees for 60 seconds. Every type of blank should have that information that comes with it. It will either come in the box or you should be able to easily find it on the manufacturer's website. So just remember, if you're using some sort of heat transfer vinyl, you want to find the time, temperature, and pressure settings for the material itself. If you're using sublimation, you want to find the time, temperature, and pressure settings for the blank. If you're using some sort of other process, DTF or EcoSolvent or all these, I'm not familiar with them. However, you can easily Google the information that you need. Remember that time, temperature, and pressure settings are recommendations. That means that you may have to test. That means that things might not turn out perfectly the first time. This is something I think that people have a really tough time with, and I totally understand because nobody wants to waste blanks and materials, but sometimes you just need to test. I actually just went and looked, and those sublimation ornaments that I showed you actually say 350 degrees for 45 seconds. But I found that when I was making them that 60 seconds actually got me a more vibrant print. So maybe your iron-on isn't sticking quite as well as you think it should. You can give it a little extra time. I wouldn't bump it up too much in degrees. A lot of times I will just say press it a little bit longer, but if you want to play with the temperature, you can as well. Next, let's talk about pressure. Pressure is controlled by this crank in the center of the press. Some projects require light pressure, most require medium pressure, and some require heavy pressure. And you have to do this sort of by feel. Right now I have my heat press set to light pressure just to make it easy to open for you. You can see it does not take much for me to open this or close it. You just go here. That's light pressure. If you crank it all the way to the right, you're gonna get heavy pressure, and it's really gonna require some elbow grease to get that to close. Medium pressure, which is where most projects are, is sort of in the middle of those two things. It really is sort of a feel it out and see if it's working for you sort of game. There's no input that tells you how high the pressure is or how low the pressure is. But if you're getting something like faded prints, you might want to increase the pressure just a little bit. Now let's talk about actually setting this press. So normally I wouldn't set it with it closed, but I'm going to do that so it's a little easier for you to see. And here on this box, you have some options. Your heat press might say mode, mine says set. So if I hit the set button here, I can set my P1, which is my temperature. So right now I have it set to 315. I can use the arrows to make it go up or down depending on the temperature I want. Once I have the temperature I want, I can click set, and that will take me to P2, which tells me how long. So again, I can use these arrows to choose more or less time. I've got it set for 30 seconds, and then I can go ahead and hit set. This is where I can change it from Fahrenheit to Celsius, so I can move those up or down, changing it here. And then I can hit set. And again, P4 for me is changing that calibration that I mentioned earlier. All right, now that we know all the parts of the heat press and we know how to set the time and temperature and pressure, let's make a project. For this project, I'm just gonna make a cute little one color Gerber onesie using this adorable little narwhal that I cut on my Cricut. If you want this SVG file for free, I will go ahead and link that in the description. You can go ahead and grab it. But we're gonna use this file to make this onesie. If you are new to using a heat press, something like a onesie or a t-shirt is a very good place to start. Generally, they're not too expensive to make, so if you mess up, it's not the end of the world. But I do like starting with iron-on vinyl just because it tends to be a simpler project. This is a Cricut iron-on vinyl. I have my press set to 315 degrees for 20 seconds. That's not actually what they say to use, but it's what I have found works best for me and my press. Again, you may have to test. I found that a full 30 seconds often makes my vinyl bubble, and I don't really like that, so I press it a little bit less, and then I do a press from the back to help really adhere that vinyl, which you'll see here in just a minute. To start, I'm going to pre-press my garment. That is because if there's any moisture or anything in there, you want to get that out before you put on your decal. I also like to lint roll all of my garments before I press them. That way you're not pressing dog hair, if you're me, or anything else to your garment. So lint roller is a really good option here. So go ahead and lay this as flat as possible. And then we're gonna go ahead and just close this and press it for, I don't know, 10 or 15 seconds. All right, now my onesie is nice and flat. It's a good pressing surface. The moisture should be out of it. So now you want to add your decal. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add it in the center here. It's kind of an awkward angle for me, but hopefully it'll be okay. Now iron-on vinyl doesn't technically require any sort of pressing sheet, but I don't know, it gives me the heebie-jeebies to put plastic straight on this hot platen. So I always use a pressing sheet. It's not necessary, it's just me. I'm just being weird, I promise. You shouldn't need to, but yeah, I just do. So I'm gonna go ahead and scoot this back in. Remember, scoot the drawer in, don't be me. And then I'm gonna go ahead and close it and press it for that 20 seconds. All right, the decal is on there, but one thing I like to do before I peel this back is I like to press it from the back. So I'm gonna go ahead and just flip this over and press it from the back for 10 seconds. This just gives that adhesive a little bit more time to activate, really get into the fibers so you have a good long-lasting project. Okay, I've pressed my project from the back. Now, depending on the type of vinyl that you're using, you may have a warm or cool peel to your vinyl. So this is something that, again, you want to Google for your particular vinyl. Most can be peeled either warm or cold. The only thing I found that needs to be peeled basically while it's hot is iron-on metal. It just works so much better to peel it off when it's hot than to wait when it's cooled. There are some that you have to wait till it's cool. Foil is an example. If you try to peel foil hot, it will crack, it will bubble, it will look really funny. So you wanna make sure you peel foil iron-on once it gets really cold. However, most things can be peeled both ways, so I'm gonna go ahead and peel back the carrier sheet, even though this is still warm, on my little narwhal here. If you find that it hasn't been sticking, you can go ahead and give it a little bit more time, but that stuck nicely. And there you have it. We've made a cute little onesie with our heat press. So the question is, would I recommend this WALApress over something like an Amazon heat press? And the question, as always, is it depends. This is a much more expensive press. This retails for about $575, whereas the Amazon heat press is closer to $200. So that's a big difference. If you're a brand new crafter just getting into this, I think the Amazon press should work for you pretty well. It worked for me for years until it didn't anymore. It died. And so it's basically a brick. Amazon didn't really have any sort of warranty services. It would have been out of warranty. I didn't have any sort of extended warranty, so basically it died and it was done. I decided to upgrade to this press because it has that bigger pressing surface. This is 15 by 15, whereas the Amazon heat press was only 15 by 12, so I can do bigger projects with. I also really needed a press that didn't take up as much room. Because I do all of these reviews, I have a lot of machinery in this space, and I needed just something that didn't take up quite as much room. So even though it is larger overall this way, it doesn't take up nearly as much room sideways because I don't have to swing that platen around. I also like that this feels very high quality. The Amazon press worked okay for a couple years, but I never felt like it was a particularly sturdy press, which is kind of scary when you're working with really high temperatures. I like that this feels very sturdy. I feel very confident using it, whereas the Amazon heat press, you know, you're just kind of like, please don't break. And so yes, I would recommend this as a higher quality option. But if this is out of your budget, I totally understand that Amazon press will work for you for a while. I had just gotten to the point where personally the upgrade was worth it for me, but if you want to start with the lower press, you totally can. That being said, if you want to start here, you can. This is a great press. I really like it. I like how it functions. It feels really sturdy, and I really, really love that pull-out drawer. It kind of makes up for the fact that I missed that sort of swing away where I would get the platen really far away from my hands. This does a nice job of getting my hands not too close to the platen because I'm just very clumsy and I don't want to burn myself. I hope you found this video helpful in learning to use your own heat press, and then I hope you found it helpful if you're looking to buy a heat press on whether or not you might want an Amazon press or if you want something like this WALApress. I've got so many more videos and posts on all sorts of different types of heat presses, so I will go ahead and link to some of those down in the description below. I hope you found this video helpful in learning how to use a heat press. Even if you don't have this specific heat press, generally the steps that I used you should be able to use on your own heat press. Of course, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments. I'd be so happy to answer them. If you found this video helpful, I would love if you would give it a like, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next week.